These astronauts are exploring Mars thinking that the planet is barren and their trip is a waste, but unbeknownst to them, it's actually populated by the oldest life form there is. On the surface of Mars, a rover is running. Inside the rover are astronauts Lane and Vincent. They spot a huge storm heading toward them, and Vince gets worried that back at the base of the mission, they might lose communications and power. Vince and Lane arrive at a site where astronaut Kim is collecting samples. They are here to pick Kim up and take her to the final briefing, because after 6 months of exploration, their mission on Mars is finally coming to an end. Kim is not interested in going to the meeting because she is upset that in 6 months, she has not made any worthwhile discoveries on Mars. Kim's foul temper seems to be a common occurrence, as the other astronauts appear used to it. Lane asks Vince what are 10 things that he won't miss about Mars when he is back on Earth, and the first 5 items he lists are Kim, savage. For number 6, Vince mentions the 6 months return journey to Earth in what he describes as a metal coffin. Lane corrects him that it is not a coffin, it's a spaceship, but Vince isn't comforted. Back at the base, storms are causing power outages and communication problems, and the chief of the mission, Brunel, asks Vince, the systems expert, to come quickly and help out the other systems expert, Harrington, so that they can get everything back online. Biologist Markov is observing something under a microscope and smiling, and the doctor of the crew, Dalby, gets curious as to why. Markov tells Brunel that there is a sensor in a particular site that needs fixing, and he wants to go out to fix it. Brunel is initially against it, because no one is allowed to go out now that they are only 19 hours away from being picked up, but Markov pushes it and convinces him. Brunel asks Harrington to go with him and tells them both to be back before the sun sets. As the two are heading out, Vince, Kim, and Lane are returning. Vince gets tense at the sound of the airlock repressurizing and gets a flashback of the ship that brought them here. Kim gets upset seeing that she was brought back to base, but Markov gets to go out again. Once in the rover, Markov reveals to Harrington that they aren't really going to fix a sensor, but to grab some more samples, because Markov has discovered a microscopic anomaly in the soil. At the base, Vince is fixing the communications system when the mission psychologist Irwin comes to speak to him. He wants to talk to Vince about his anxiety about the return journey, but Vince tells him he is fine and doesn't need to talk about it. Kim gets angry with Brunel about the fact Markov gets to go out one last time while she has been dragged back inside. After Brunel leaves, Kim decides to go through Markov's private files, despite protests from her fellow crew members. She says she wants to know what was so important that Markov pulled this sneaky move to go out. The files reveal that Markov has found the oldest life form of all in Martian soil, bacteria, and it is multiplying, which means it is alive. There's life on Mars, and it's possibly been here for thousands of years. The crew discusses why Markov has not shared this with them, and Kim suggests it's because he doesn't want to share credit. Meanwhile, Markov collects another sample at the site where he found the last one, and his discovery is confirmed. He is ecstatic and tells Harrington to come out and take his picture on this momentous occasion. However, just then, the ground beneath Markov moves, a sinkhole forms, and he falls into it. Harrington radios to the base for help. Dalby and Brunel arrive, and Dalby says they need to go into the sinkhole and help Markov. Brunel argues that Markov's suit could not have possibly survived this fall, so in all likelihood, he is already dead. Dalby tries to argue against it, but Brunel remains firm. He says that they will need special equipment and permission from Mission Control to pull out Markov's body. Brunel and Harrington head back to base in one of the rovers, while Dalby decides to stay there with Markov. Brunel and Harrington arrive back on base, and while the entire crew grieves Markov's death, Kim is more concerned with when they will publicly announce his discovery. Irwin tells him to have some human decency, but Kim insinuates that Markov broke the rules, so it's his own fault he is dead. Harrington gets enraged at this and almost hits Kim. Irwin and Brunel de-escalate the situation. Mission Control gives Brunel permission to retrieve Markov's body. Back at the site of the sinkhole, Dalby shines a flashlight into the hole but sees nothing. She comes back inside the rover, and Brunel tells her over the radio that he is on his way. Dalby hears something outside and realizes that someone is trying to enter the rover. The door of the rover opens, and whatever Dalby sees scares and shocks her. Brunel, Vince, and Erwin arrive at the site of the sinkhole and see that Dalby is not there. Brunel assumes that Dalby went into the sinkhole against his orders, and he tells Vince to go down and check it out. Vince straps a rope to himself and heads down. At the bottom of the sinkhole, Vince sees that the bacterial organism has grown all over the place. Just then, Vince starts having a panic attack. He once again has a flashback of the ship that brought them to Mars. In the flashback, Vince steps into the airlock of the ship and begins depressurizing it. He suffers from severe claustrophobia and couldn't take being locked in a ship for 6 months without going insane. Brunel pulls Vince back up, and at the same time, Erwin spots 2 sets of footprints heading back to the base. Brunel doesn't understand, because even if Dalby rescued Markov and he was somehow still alive, why wouldn't they take the rover? He radios Kim and tells her to prepare the med bay in case Markov and Dalby return. Back at base, Kim notices 2 people approaching on the radar, and Harrington goes to open the airlock for them. Kim is hesitant, because the 2 are not responding on the radio, but Harrington is already depressurizing the airlock. Markov enters, and Harrington is shocked and disgusted to see that his face is completely blackened and disfigured. Zombie Markov grabs a power drill and shoves it inside Harrington. An injured Harrington sounds the alarm and tells Kim to run. Zombie Dalby arrives as well. While Kim fights and runs from the zombies, Brunel and the rest arrive at the base. Brunel tells everyone to wait outside while he goes in. Kim notices that the zombies are incredibly thirsty and hungry. Zombie Dalby spots herself in the mirror, and for a moment, it looks like she is saddened by what she sees and what she has become, before returning to her mindless zombie ways. Brunel arrives and tells Kim to put on a suit while he distracts the zombies. Kim rushes out, but before Brunel can head out as well, he is hit in the shoulder with an axe by zombie Markov. He makes it outside, severely injured, while Kim shuts the door. The others tell her that Markov, Dalby, and Harrington are still inside, but she says that they are dead. They don't believe her, but then Vince sees it for himself through the airlock window. He says that the zombies are trapped inside, but Kim says they have tools and explosives, so they can get out. Lane reminds everyone that Brunel is injured and that helping him is their first priority. They pick him up and take him to the second base. At the second base, the crew lays Brunel down and Lane takes a look at his wound. It's pretty bad, and Lane says that no one here is trained to deal with this. Kim notices that the wound is huge, but there is not that much blood coming out, which is strange. Brunel starts saying weird things. He says he can't remember what his kids look like. Then he says he feels incredibly thirsty. Erwin brings him water, and out of nowhere, Brunel starts choking Erwin. The rest barely contain him, as Erwin pulls away. Brunel dies. Kim starts tying Brunel up, and the rest don't understand why. Kim says that Dalby and Markov are outside, exposed to the atmosphere, and yet they are still moving. Something is not right. Erwin starts freaking out and says that he just wants to go home to his daughter Ella. Vince notices that some kind of infection is spreading in Brunel's blood vessels. Meanwhile, camera footage shows that Markov and Dalby have managed to blast out of Base 1. Vince says that there is an oxygen pipeline connecting Bases 1 and 2. He can use the line to head back to Base 1 and contact Mission Control for help without Markov and Dalby knowing. Markov and Dalby arrive at Base 2 and start banging at the airlock door. Meanwhile, Brunel's body also starts shaking violently. Vince suits up and heads into the oxygen pipeline. Lane is worried for him because the pipeline is a tight space, and she knows about his claustrophobia. She gives him words of comfort over the radio. Kim, Lane, and Erwin take a sample of Brunel's blood and discover that it is infected by the same bacteria that Markov discovered in the soil. The infection is multiplying fast. In the pipeline, Vince has another panic attack. He once again has a flashback. In the flashback, he depressurizes the airlock completely, but Lane arrives at the last minute to save him. In the present, Lane speaks to him over the radio and comforts him by telling him that he is not alone. Everyone here is losing their shit. Vince continues the mission. Meanwhile, Lane deduces that since this infection is a bacterium, it is possible that they can counter it with a simple antibiotic. They decide to test the theory on Brunel's blood. After some testing, Lane's theory proves correct as the antibiotic stops the spread of the infection. Meanwhile, Erwin notices that Zombie Dalby and Zombie Markov have lost interest and are heading back toward Base 1, where Vince is. To entice them, Kim opens the exterior door of the airlock. In the meantime, Lane discovers that the antibiotics only stop the bacteria temporarily, and after a while it develops a resistance. Vince manages to get power and communications back up at Base 1 and contacts Mission Control. He manages to establish radio communication, but before he can explain to Mission Control what has happened, the power goes out again. He returns to the power source and finds an infected Harrington ripping everything out. Zombie Harrington attacks Vince, and Vince barely fights him off. Vince heads back via the oxygen pipe, and Zombie Harrington follows. The two return to Base 2, and Kim fights Zombie Harrington off while the rest escape. Erwin, Vince, and Lane reach the airlock, and Erwin can see Kim is coming, but out of fear he closes the door in her face and lets the zombies have her. He lies to the other two that she didn't make it. As the three are about to head out of the airlock, Zombie Dalby, who previously passed out, awakens and stabs Lane with scissors in her thigh. The three uninfected people manage to escape in the rover nonetheless. In the rover, Vince gives Lane lots of antibiotics in order to subdue the bacteria before it even starts spreading, and give Lane's body a chance to fight it. Lane isn't too optimistic about her odds, but Vince refuses to give up on her. Vince says they will take this rover to the site where they were originally supposed to be picked up, since Mission Control will most likely arrive there in a few hours as scheduled. However, Erwin reports that this rover does not have enough power to take them there. Vince says they'll have to go on foot, but then realizes that Lane's injury won't let her walk. Erwin lightly suggests that since Lane is infected, they should leave her, and she gets upset. She says that Brunel grabbed Erwin by the neck so he could be infected too. Erwin ignores this comment. Erwin then comes up with another plan. They can drive to the second rover that is still parked at the site of the sinkhole. It will have full power. They arrive at the site, and Erwin goes to check the second rover. Once inside the rover, he radios Vince and tells him to abandon Lane and come with him. Vince refuses, and Erwin drives off with the rover. Inside the rover, he takes off his headgear, and it is revealed that his neck is in fact infected. Back in the first rover, Vince says that they will wait for the sunrise, and then the solar panels will charge the rover back up. Lane wonders out loud if the zombies can still feel like normal people, if they are just trapped inside their bodies, unable to control their urges due to the infection. Then, she starts feeling incredibly thirsty. As Vince hands her a water, his face reveals that the reality of the situation is dawning on him. He still refuses to give up on Lane. In the morning, Vince wakes up and hears a broadcast that a rescue ship is arriving, but he can't seem to respond to it. He goes in the back of the rover and sees that Lane is gone. He follows her tracks and finds her a little way down. He calls out to her, but Lane tells him to stay away because she can't stop the infection from spreading. Vince refuses to listen. Knowing that he won't stop trying to save her, Lane takes off her helmet and commits suicide. Vince is devastated. As he holds her lifeless body in his arms, the infection brings her back, and she starts attacking Vince. In the middle of her violent attack, Lane begs Vince to kill her, and he grabs a huge rock, and does so, regrettably. Next, Vince sees the rescue mission landing, and also sees 3 zombies heading toward it in the distance. He tries to warn them, but is unable to make radio contact. He can only hear as the zombies enter the ship and tear apart the members of the rescue mission. In the middle of a storm, Vince sneaks past the zombies eating the crew members and enters the ship. Inside, he finds an infected Erwin getting ready to take off. Still retaining some of his human-like characteristics, Erwin says he wants to say goodbye to his daughter, but he can't even remember her name. Vince says he can't let this bacterium get to Earth. He has to end it here. Erwin attacks Vince and almost kills him with a knife. He launches the ship and in the air, and the fight between the two continues. Vince beats Erwin to death, and the ship reaches stable orbit, enabling zero gravity. Vince overcomes his fear and stands in the airlock as it depressurizes and blows Erwin's body outside. Next, Vince docks with the station in orbit around Mars and sends a message to Earth. informing them of his survival, and also telling them all that has happened on Mars. He comes clean and says that they can send a rescue mission to him, but it is likely that he is infected as well, due to all his contact with the infected people. He says if that is indeed the case, he will throw the station straight into Mars' atmosphere and burn up with it, and if it is not, he waits for their response. The end. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you.